Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Sky High Stories. She didn't leave in the way people expect endings to happen. There was no shouting, no crying, no dramatic final argument echoing through the house. One morning, she simply moved through the rooms quietly, as if she were a guest instead of a wife. Her suitcase was already packed, placed neatly by the door. Every movement she made was calm, controlled, almost unsettling in its certainty. He stood there watching, waiting for tears, accusations, or at least a question that might give him a chance to respond. None came. Her silence confused him more than anger ever could. He tried to read her face, but there was nothing to grab onto. No pain he could use, no weakness he could exploit. The small details were what made the moment feel final. Her side of the closet was empty. The bathroom drawer she always used was cleared out. On the table, her wedding ring lay perfectly scented, catching the light as if it wanted to be noticed. His phone buzzed with messages he sent too late, calls she never answered, voicemails left unheard. Instead of panic, he felt a strange sense of relief. He told himself this was easier than a fight. Silence, in his mind, meant defeat. He assumed she had finally understood her place, finally accepted that she couldn't win against him. As the door closed behind her without a single word, he didn't realize he was watching the beginning of something far more dangerous than anger. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was the first move. In the days after she left, he wore confidence like armor. He walked taller, spoke louder, and carried himself as if the silence she left behind was proof of his victory. To him, the absence of drama meant there had been no real loss. He told himself that if she had truly mattered, she would have fought harder. Money had always solved his problems, and he saw no reason this would be any different. Wealth gave him options, power gave him leverage, and status ensured people listened when he spoke. In his world, control was measured by what you owned and how easily you could replace what walked away. He had built an empire on that belief, and he trusted it completely. When people asked about her, he shrugged with a practiced smile. He said she couldn't handle his lifestyle, that the pressure was too much for her. Some days he framed it as her choice, other days as her failure. Either way, he made sure the story always ended with him standing above it all, untouched. The private jet became his favorite symbol of reassurance. He watched it on the runway, sleek and obedient, ready to carry him wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted. It reminded him that freedom belonged to him alone. While she disappeared quietly, he still had engines roaring at his command. What he didn't realize was how loud his confidence sounded in the face of the truth. Every boast, every careless word, only sharpened the irony waiting for him. He believed he had won, unaware that the game had already shifted, and the most important piece was no longer in his hands. Looking back, there were signs he never bothered to read. She had always been quieter than him, more observant, content to sit back and listen while others spoke. He mistook that patience for passivity, never realizing how carefully she watched the world around her. While he talked about deals, numbers, and power, she absorbed details he assumed were beneath her notice. She noticed the pauses in his stories that didn't quite line up, the dates that shifted slightly each time he retold them. She saw unfamiliar charges pass through shared accounts and documents moved without explanation. There were phone calls taken in other rooms, conversations that stopped when she entered, and decisions made without her knowledge. Each moment alone seemed insignificant, but together they formed a pattern she couldn't ignore. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry or accuse. Instead, she started listening more closely and asking fewer questions. In silence, she gathered what she needed: copies of papers, names of people involved, and a clear understanding of how deeply their lives and finances were entangled. What he saw as emotional distance was, in truth, careful preparation. Her silence was never rooted in fear. It was restraint. It was the discipline of someone waiting for the right moment instead of reacting too soon. She understood that power rarely announces itself loudly. It moves quietly, almost invisibly. The crucial decision came late one night, after she confirmed one final detail he never thought she would check. In that moment, everything became clear. She didn't need his permission, his approval, or his mercy. She only needed timing, and once she chose it, there was no turning back. To him, the private jet was more than transportation. It was proof. Proof that he had made it, that he operated on a level most people would never reach. He spoke about it as if it were an extension of himself, something he had earned through sheer ambition and dominance. He never questioned its place in his life because he never imagined it could be questioned at all. What he overlooked were the details buried beneath the luxury. The jet wasn't just a symbol, it was a structure of contracts, signatures, and shared financial decisions. It sat within a web of assets tied to trusts, joint holdings, and legal agreements he had signed without reading closely. Paperwork bored him. Routine made him careless. He trusted that his name, his status, was enough to keep everything exactly where it belonged. She, however, had noticed the fine print. She understood how ownership could be divided, how access could be granted or restricted, and how one overlooked clause could outweigh years of assumed control. While he admired the jet from the outside, she had studied what held it in place. There were moments when assistants mentioned documents needing signatures or confirmations, and he waved them off without concern. He never suspected those ordinary moments were quietly shaping his future. In his mind, nothing connected to the jet could ever move without him. The truth was far less stable than he believed. The jet that represented his freedom was balanced on details he dismissed as trivial, and as it waited silently on the runway, it carried a secret he wouldn't understand until it was already too late. The call came on a morning that was supposed to be routine. He was already dressed, schedule tight, confidence intact, when his assistant's voice cracked on the other end of the line. There was a delay at the airport, she said. A problem with the jet. At first, he laughed it off. Delays happened. Problems were fixed. That was how his world worked. But minutes turned into confusion, and confusion turned into panic. Another call followed, then another. The jet hadn't just been delayed. It had been grounded. Access was restricted. Paperwork had changed overnight. Words like transfer, authorization, and legal hold were suddenly being used in the same sentence as his name. He demanded explanations. Assistants scrambled, lawyers were pulled into emergency meetings, and phones buzzed nonstop with unanswered questions. No one had clear answers, only fragments of information that refused to fit together. For the first time in years, his money didn't produce instant solutions. As the truth slowly surfaced, a chilling realization took hold. This hadn't happened by accident. It wasn't sabotage from a rival or a bureaucratic error. Every detail traced back to decisions made quietly, legally, and with precision. Decisions she had been positioned to make. Her silence replayed in his mind. The calm exit, the lack of confrontation, the absence of threats. What he had dismissed as emotional withdrawal revealed itself as strategy. She hadn't needed to argue or warn him. She had already moved the pieces while he was busy admiring the board. In that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. The jet, once his ultimate symbol of dominance, was no longer under his control. And as panic tightened around him, he finally understood the cost of underestimating a woman who chose silence over noise. That night, he returned to a house that no longer felt like his. The rooms were quiet in a way that pressed against him, heavy with memories he had ignored for too long. Her absence was everywhere, in the empty chair at the table, in the unused side of the bed, in the silence that followed every step he took. The home that once echoed with routine now reflected only what was missing. He searched for a note, a message, anything that might explain or soften the blow. There was nothing. No goodbye, no accusations, no final words to argue against. Just consequences unfolding without warning or mercy. The lack of explanation unsettled him more than anger ever could have. Outside those walls, the fallout began. Business partners grew distant, conversations became cautious, and invitations quietly stopped arriving. Whispers followed him into rooms where respect used to be automatic. People who once admired his control now watched him closely, as if sensing a weakness he couldn't hide. Alone in the silence he once dismissed, understanding finally settled in. Her absence wasn't temporary. It wasn't a tactic meant to bring her back. It was a decision, fully formed and irreversible. The silence he thought proved his power had become his punishment. Only then did he grasp the truth. She hadn't taken anything that truly mattered. She had left him with exactly what he deserved, an empty space where her presence once grounded his world, and the echo of a silence he could no longer escape. Silence, he would learn, was far more powerful than any argument, any outburst, or any attempt to assert dominance. She had walked away without confrontation, without spectacle, and in that act of quiet, she held more control than he ever had. What he had mistaken for submission had been strength, calculated, deliberate, and unshakable. She didn't seek to destroy him, nor did she need to. There was no revenge, no public humiliation, no dramatic exposure of his flaws. Her victory lay in reclaiming herself, in stepping out of a life that no longer served her, and in refusing to allow his ego or his wealth to dictate her choices. Every step she took away from him was a declaration of autonomy, a message louder than any words she could have spoken. The contrast could not have been sharper. He had been loud, commanding, and confident, wielding money and status as shields. Yet all that noise had blinded him to reality. She moved quietly, thoughtfully, independently, and in doing so, she shifted the entire balance. Walking away quietly had allowed her to keep her dignity intact, protect her future, and show him that power wasn't measured by wealth, possessions, or appearances. Real strength, she had proven, was measured by one's ability to leave behind what diminishes you, without a single word. Months later, she existed in a world that was entirely her own. Mornings began with sunlight streaming into a quiet space she controlled completely, and days passed without interference or obligation to anyone who had once tried to dictate her life. She moved through her routines with ease and purpose, untouchable and unbothered by the man who once believed he could own her presence. Her independence wasn't loud or ostentatious. It was serene, deliberate, and complete. Meanwhile, he discovered that the jet, the symbol of his dominance and freedom, was irrelevant. Its grounding, its transfer, its legal complications, all of it mattered far less than he had believed. The real loss had never been material. The void he now felt was the absence of her, and with it came the bitter truth. No amount of wealth or power could replace what he had taken for granted. Every late-night reflection, every empty room, every whispered reminder in the holes of his life pointed back to the same conclusion. She had walked away silently, leaving behind nothing but her own strength and the echo of what he could not control. And in the end, he understood, too late, that her silence had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. She didn't need to say a word. The private jet, the money, the status, they were all meaningless. Her departure told the entire story.